Well, joining us now, a very special guest, N.K. Singh, one of the finest economists in India, somebody who's been involved in administration at so many levels, and somebody who's also had a big say in the Kovind Panel report, which looked at one nation, one election. Thank you, Mr. Singh, very much for being with us. One of the problems, or one of the key points which has been mentioned, is that the present system of elections, where we've got separate elections at the assembly and at the center, ends up being far too expensive. If one nation, one election were to happen, could you tell us how it would be a more cost-effective solution?
Well, I think in two very direct ways, Vishnu. One is that the repetitive nature of the elections add to repetitive costs. Costs in terms of the time lost in the model code of conduct, detracting the focus of those elected from governance to fighting the next election. In terms of the deployment of the law and order machinery, repetitively for purposes of holding separate elections, which is not inconsiderable. In terms of the fact that the investor confidence and uncertainty detracts from investment decisions, waiting for the outcome of the government, if that is done several times. In terms of the interruption of continuing production process by companies who wish to look for a predictable government and has tangible and intangible costs. So I think that if you add all this, both episodically and in terms of the data which you have given, and the paper which presented by me and my colleague Prachi suggests that it could make an enormous difference of 1.5% of GDP, which is at current prices 9 lakh crores, which is an enormous amount of expenditure. In terms of the quality of expenditure, the emphasis moving towards from capital expenditure to revenue expenditure,
right,
moving repetitively.
I just wanted to understand that the number of 1.5% of GDP, how it would be an enhancement to our GDP by 1.5%. Could you, because that's what the opposition has been saying is not based on numbers, when in fact you have gone into substantive analysis to explain how it would help our GDP growth. Could you explain to us in simple terms how that would work?
Well, that's expenditure. In terms of, and we know that capital expenditure has multiplier effects on growth, on employment, and in putting a much higher quality of life. So in terms of the quality of expenditure, moving away from revenue expenditure to capital expenditure requires no explanation, because pre-election political parties place emphasis on revenue expenditure instead of capital expenditure. So that's one area. Secondly, you see in terms of educational outcomes, our study shows that deployment of teachers repetitively for purposes of becoming polling officers detracts from the quality, and educational outcomes are far worse.
Yeah.
In terms of the spurt in crime rates, which, because the deployment of the policemen and the personnel, even from the state administration, notwithstanding the paramilitary forces, repetitively has costs and cost consequences. As I said, that investment decisions by potential investors get postponed, and a climate of uncertainty has costs which we all know are intangible but very significant. So if you add up and aggregate all these, and the example which we have given in our paper is whenever those states which have followed synchronized elections, then states which have gone into asynchronized elections have demonstrated significant changes in rates of economic growth, which we have on which we have given empirical data. I earnestly urge that those who are critical of this would take some time. This is all available on the website. And if it would be of enormous value in carrying this debate forward, because it's not going to end tomorrow. There's going to be further work on it. And I think that I hope this work continues. But if they do look at the paper and the data and the analysis which we have put forward, there would be more than a ring of credibility to what we have put forward in our recommendations.
There are two views as far as enhancing administrative efficiency. You argue that, in fact, there would be less strain on the administrative mechanism which presently operates now, where it's almost constantly deployed, if not every year, then every other year for some election or the other. There are those who say that given the scale of holding assembly and national elections together, there would be more strain on the administrative efficiency of the system per se. Could you explain to us where you stand on this?
Well, Vishnu, this is slightly, if you ask me, in a lighter vein. Those who are critically opposed to it have gone so further as to say that this would impinge on the basic structure of the Constitution, namely the centerpiece of a working federal entity, which is what India is. Now, considering the fact, Vishnu, that we all know that till 1967, elections to state and assemblies are all held together. You mean federalism was only born in this country after 1968? So, until 67, if we found ourselves competent enough to do so, even some states this time in the last elections have had state elections along with the parliamentary general elections. So it was managed exceedingly well. There were no such complaints which we have seen, that it either cast an onerous burden on the law and order machinery or on the governance administrative structure, that there were no other administrative complications of this, or for several of the states which have gone in for synchronized elections. So this argument, in my view, will not stand the scrutiny of any analytical coherence if they read the totality of the scheme of things which we have submitted in our recommendation to the committee.
Lots of points there. Thank you, sir, very much for speaking to us and explaining it in simple terms. There's so many questions which are raised and we do need answers. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Vishnu. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.